So good afternoon once again. For those of you who joined us after the lunch break, welcome. Just to recap, today's event revolves around celebrating 25 years of German unity. 25 years is what, guys? It's Jahrhundert, one says in Germany. It means a fourth of a century is already gone. So we were talking and discussing about how the same people, two languages, two different systems have come together. And we are very honored. I'm all very honored, dear directors, faculty, staff, German students, German citizens. I would like to welcome you. Now it's high time for our keynote speech. The keynote speech will be delivered by none other than His Excellency Herbert Quelle. He is the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, stationed in Chicago, Illinois, and he is responsible for the 13th Midwestern states, including the great state of Ohio. Yeah, so Ohioans, he represents this sovereign nation, Germany, which is at the heart of Europe. He represents his country to this part of the USA. So I would like to share with you a few words about his background, education, and career-wise about His Excellency Herrn Quelle. He was born on December 27, 1953, in Herford, Germany. I believe it's in Niedersachsen, near North Rhine-Westphalia. Yeah, thank you.
30 kilometers
short of the border. Yeah, okay. One of those federal states, wonderful states. And after achieving his A-level exams, he joined the Bundeswehr, the military service, in 73 to 74. After that, he joined the university, and he studied English language, political science, and what a combination, musicology, music. And I have heard, rumor has it, that he is a very accomplished, shall I share with that? Yeah. He knows very well, and he plays key musical instruments. So much so for that. Then he entered, after passing the rigorous diplomatic career entrance exam of the Federal Republic of Germany, he started serving his country, Germany, as an attaché at the Foreign Office in Bonn. At that time, of course, Bonn was the capital of West Germany because Berlin was divided, as all of us know. And after serving there 3-4 years, after making the necessary preparatory work, he was stationed to come to Los Angeles. He was stationed as the German Consulate General. And stationed in California, he was responsible for the western states of the US of A. The several states like Arizona, Nevada, I believe also up to Colorado or maybe west of Colorado. So he was responsible for those states. After that, he went back home, worked in the Nerve Center, the headquarters in Bonn. And then once again, in 1988, he was redeployed. This time around, listen everybody, Pretoria. Pretoria is the capital city of South Africa. And he served there in very interesting times between 1988 to 1991. That is 3 years short of what? The release of, Mandela. And after Pretoria, he was stationed to Havana, Cuba, between 1991 to 1995. I was also a diplomat once upon a time. I would love to have been stationed in Cuba, if I may, but wasn't never so. Maybe in my other life, another time. So then back to the Bonn, and in 2003, he was stationed in the European continent. He went to Warsaw. That's in Warsaw, Poland. He served there, distinguished himself and served there in Poland. He was there, head of economic affairs, came back again to Bonn, worked there 3-4 years. Then he was assigned in London. If some of you know about diplomatic life, London, next to Washington, D.C. and New York City, is the most senior place, and then Geneva follows, and then Paris follows. So you could see he's going up the career, his diplomatic career. London, 4 years, and then he was promoted to an ambassador position, and he was assigned in Baku. Baku is Azerbaijan in Central Asia. There, after serving his country, Germany, for 3-4 years, then he was assigned to come back to the US of A, to Boston. Boston is the seat of the German consulate for those up to Vermont, I believe, those several states, American Bundesstaaten. After serving there, he was redeployed to his current position to Chicago, which he had assumed this position since July 2014. So as you can see, we are fortunate to have a seasoned diplomat with us, and I personally eagerly await his keynote address. Your Excellency, if I could say a few words in German, willkommen. Ich hoffe, Sie werden wohl fühlen. Ich hoffe, dass die Studenten, die Fakultäten, die hier sind, sie sind begeistert auf Ihre Rede. So the floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Dear faculty, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm overwhelmed by your hospitality. I feel very much at home in Athens, having been here just one hour. But also with the preparation of this entire visit by you, Brooke, this is really great. And you're so modest, you yourself looking back at a distinguished career in diplomacy, which you, of course, after a brief interlude, chose to change for more academic. Maybe I could follow your example after I've retired from diplomatic life. Retirement in Germany, if you're in civil service, is obligatory. There's a cutoff date, and I know exactly my cutoff date. That's the 30th of June, 2019. So I will have to decide in 2 years whether I want to switch again for another posting or whether I prefer the American hospitality of the Midwest, which is 6.5 times the size of my home country, Germany, and well, 70 million people only, 10 million short of the 81 we have in Germany, but it involves a lot of traveling, and especially these days before winter kicks in. Those sitting behind the pillar there, why there are empty seats here. I think I won't be moving across the room, so I know it's unless you are hiding something from me, then it's always good to see what's happening on stage. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity within the framework of your Campus Week campaign to talk about two current subjects. First, the 25th anniversary of reunification of Germany, and connect that with a very hot issue, the current refugee crisis in Europe. Before I do that, I would nevertheless like to point out the posters that are outside. For those of you who want to get a grasp of what happened between the 8th of November, the fall of the wall, 1989, and the 3rd of October, which is the formal legal date of unification in 1990, so 11 months after that event, which produced, I would still say, more dramatic, nicer pictures. I mean, I was you pointed out, in South Africa at the time, and even apartheid television produced those images into living rooms in the southern cone of Africa, and then at the time, as you may recall, there was no internet in the form that we have today. You were waiting for your newspapers to arrive, and the diplomatic pouch came once a week, and it brought a stack of newspapers. So you got 7 Frankfurter Allgemeine and Die Welt and Süddeutsche, and if you were high up in the line among the first, you were lucky, and then if you were further down, then the thing you could do was put on the Rolling Stones record, "Who Wants Yesterday's Papers?" So there was, of course, shortwave radio. Shortwave radio, yes, shortwave radio. There is still something like that, but it has been largely replaced by internet radio. Once you have access to internet, that makes communication so much faster and easier, and of course it also produces downsides, and maybe we can discuss that later. What was cause and effect of my Chancellor's policy, Angela Merkel's policy with regard to Hungary? Did the welcoming signal increase or tempt more refugees or migrants to seek the promised land in Germany? Is Facebook communication among refugees one driving force behind what we see as far as migration movements go? I think all these are questions that are totally new. I know there have been theories about these. But they are new in practice compared to the time that we are talking about, namely 89, 90, when communication was, of course, still already much faster than it was at the time of the mail carriages going across the country and the telegraph and so forth. But still, compared to today, relatively slower. And what I'm aiming at is the following. You mentioned Ronald Reagan and the famous adage, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." I think it was indeed important in 1987 that the West demonstrated firmness with especially the United States, demonstrated firmness with requesting what is laid down in our basic law. It is called basic law until today. We avoided the term constitution because the Federal Republic of Germany, I'm a Wessi, and that became clear from my CV. In the Federal Republic of Germany, we had in the preamble of the Basic Law that the Constitution should be written and adopted after Germany was reunified. So the reunification was a goal laid down in our Constitution. And we had felt since 49 that this was something because we were not, as Germans, trying to be the old hegemon of Europe again, but we had been firmly embedded ourselves, integrated into European communities, networks. Of course, we thought that this was a goal that was shared by our neighbors, but we found out that actually there were question marks in the immediate neighborhood about this goal, and I come to that in a minute. So Mr. Reagan says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. I don't think that Gorbachev actually permitted the wall to be torn down because Reagan said that. I think Gorbachev was one of those clever politicians, like later F.W. de Klerk in South Africa, who saw that the system that he had inherited simply didn't work. The Soviet Union didn't work politically, socially, economically. So there was a policy of glasnost and perestroika, and it was just a fortunate moment of somebody who was in power and had that insight, with somebody who was not pursuing this goal with aggressive military attitude. And so when due to Gorbachev's reluctance of reacting by force to peaceful demonstrations in Leipzig and in other places in the German Democratic Republic, finally, in November, to the surprise of many, the barriers at the checkpoints in Berlin opened, and the wall then came down. This was possible due to somebody back there in Moscow saying, we will not react to that in the way that we did in '53, when on the 17th of June that year, protest demonstrations in East Germany and the German Democratic Republic were suppressed by force. But it was permitted. And I think that is a huge difference, and we have to bear that in mind, between that period in history and today, with a totally different mindset of the current leadership in Moscow. Putin has said that the downfall of the Soviet Union and the policy of Gorbachev leading to that was greatest tragedy that could happen. So Gorbachev, who's still alive, would never say that. I think he was surprised by something that happened, but he was willing to take the risks and let things happen as it did. So that was a window of opportunity that we grasped, and then when the wall had come down, of course there was a question: what happens now? Because this does not mean that now you are one. We are talking about two independent, sovereign countries that were both members of the United Nations, and the United Nations is a network of nations that have to adhere to certain international law, norms, and procedures. So we then had to enter into a process, and that is described quite nicely here in the posters, how to get to that stage of a unified country. And that involves everything from social security to the law, the laws of the land, the education system, the question to which bloc do you belong? Are you automatically, as an adhering country, member of NATO? Are you automatically a member of the European communities, what was still the name of the organization at the time? Now it is the European Union, and whatnot. And these were questions that not the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany could decide on by themselves. No. Why not? Because there was still, until that date, the final say of the occupational powers of the Second World War. We were independent and sovereign, but not fully to the extent that we could take these decisions without the major players, Moscow Soviet Union, which still existed at the time, Washington, United States, Paris, and London. And I was in, you mentioned that also in your introduction book, I was in London from 2006 to 2010, and in 2009, 20 years after these events, the archives were opened. And we all knew about Maggie Thatcher's reluctance at the time, but how serious this reluctance had been only shown up in the cables between the British Embassy or Her Majesty's Embassy in Bonn and in East Berlin, sent to Downing Street and to Westminster, and the responses, the instructions that came from London to both embassies as to how one should proceed with this happening. And the French president, Mitterrand at the time, famous for saying he loved Germany so much that he wanted to see two of them. These were our two main partners with whom we as West Germans thought we had seriously dealt with historic questions, that we had overcome the hostilities which had dominated at least the French-German relationship over centuries, where despite the joint dynasties, if you want, with the British Empire and Germany in the 19th century, that there were these resentments in London, we were really surprised, not to say we were shocked in Bonn. And without the then President George W. Bush Sr., or the first, whatever you prefer, the resistance of the two countries I mentioned in Europe and the reluctance of others could not have been overcome, at least not so fast as then was possible. So we are forever grateful for the support that we have enjoyed from the United States in that reunification process. And of course, there was the Russians then had problems with certain questions that came up, like NATO membership and what have you. But all these could be overcome in a very constructive way eventually. And those of you who are German readers, I recommend to look at the Spiegel of this week and look at the interview with Dieter Kastrup, who was one of the chief negotiators on the West German side, member, Undersecretary of State, and a person I know quite well, describing the hiccups along the way. And I think there's actually one poster where Kastrup is together with then Foreign Minister Genscher. I've been given the sign, although that's unfair because I started 5 minutes after the initial time, but still, I'll be brief, and then I think we still have time for Q&A. And by the way, in the Q&A, you can ask on other matters that I have not addressed. A few things I want to make clear about the refugee crisis. And the first and most important, I think, is to highlight the refugee crisis does not have its roots or origins in Europe. The origins and roots are outside of Europe, but are in a greater vicinity of Europe than they are of the US vicinity. But nevertheless, there is a responsibility not only for Europe and the European Union, there is responsibility at least also for the United States, and maybe on a global level to solve the crisis. What we see in Europe is only a fraction of roughly 60 million people, according to the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, who are on the march at the time. So only a fraction concerns Europe. But this fraction is large enough in the case of Germany alone. If we get 800,000 as is a realistic prediction for this year, 800,000 is 1% of our population, which would mean in American terms, United States taking in 3.5 million people in a year, which they haven't done, not even with illegal immigration, which is a big topic not only in the Republican campaign. Anyway, that is a huge problem. We can do certain things, and they have to do with money. Foremost, we have to increase the budget of international organizations, foremost United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, the European Union, and the G7 have just talked about that, and I think there's a G7 commitment. Of course, United States is part of G7 to maybe add up to 1.7 billion dollars, I guess it is, to the budget of the UNHCR, because that will help to alleviate the situation in the refugee camps around Syria, which is the most, the largest, which produces the largest contingent of refugees at the moment. Then there is obligation for all states, according to the Geneva Convention, to take in refugees. No, on the other hand, no country can be forced to take in refugees beyond its means, and every country has to protect also its own culture and people. But my Chancellor, Angela Merkel, as you've all read, has taken a very courageous decision. She has said we will be welcoming refugees. She wanted to set an example when she saw that there were very bad situations in neighboring European countries. And so coming back to Facebook, this maybe increased the push on Germany. She was certainly aware of that risk. A few weeks, 2 weeks actually later, we had to say, now we have to put a little brake on this, because we got into a situation which was comparable to, I mean, we're a little farther away from Chicago than Milwaukee here, but Soldier Field and the Bears, I think, are something that most of you sports enthusiasts know. So capacity crowd of Soldier Field is 61,500. And that was the number that reached Hamburg Munich train station in 2 weeks alone. And so if you compare the two scenarios, hundreds of thousands unticketed fans trying to watch a Bears game in Soldier Field, you have as a gatekeeper to then take very difficult decisions in order to prevent the people who are standing in the first lines are not trampled to death. You know, then you have to open your gates, and then you have to close them again when you can. And the situation of Germany is like that of the Soldier Field immediately on land, but the tens of thousands of fans that might be trying to reach the stadium across Michigan Lake, you cannot build a fence, because if you build a fence in the water, people behind the fence are drowning. So our southern periphery of the European Union Italy and Greece, who are most affected, need solidarity. We are trying to build up hotspots, so-called hotspots, where we process refugees and all types of migrants that we encounter, and then send them in a distribution system contingent-wise to other countries. Final sentence, we had, for the first time in the history of the European Union, to take a decision on the head of government level against member states, which was not a violation of the rules. These are established rules that you can vote or take decisions on a with qualified majority. But we never wanted to do it. We have the consensus principle. Only it was not possible. We needed to give signals to our constituencies that we are actually dealing with this problem on a European-wide solidarity principle, and not with one country only taking the main burden of this. So Hungary, Poland, Czech, and the Slovak republics were overruled, and now eventually the European Commission will have to implement decisions where to put 120,000 plus 40,000 refugees in the next few months. Germany is doing her share. We are accepting our responsibility. We don't think the problem goes away if we erect a fence. We have to tackle the problem at the roots, and we have to find intelligent ways, and they are not going to war again in any of these countries. And that, I think, is enough material, enough stuff for a discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Yes, please.
Speaking of East-West coming together in unity, is there any detectable difference among people in eastern parts of Germany, the former GDR, and West Germany, toward this immigration crisis, or toward the decision by Putin to launch airstrikes in Syria? I mean, is there any of the old feelings or old histories that the long shadow, or is that totally gone?
Two elements of your question, which are quite distinct, I find. First one is the attitude towards refugees, towards foreigners. The second is attitude how to tackle the problem, if I understand, to go to maybe with airstrikes. Germany, let me start with us. There's consensus in Germany that we will arm, as we have been doing, continue to arm forces that are fighting ISIL, as you say in this country. We say IS or ISIS, doesn't matter. So we've sent weapons to the Peshmerga and I think some other minor groups, and I think that policy is shared nationwide as a good policy. I don't see any distinction there. There's a big fuss about, and maybe I should say there's a big discussion, major discussion around the question whether certain parts of former East Germany or former German Democratic Republic are more xenophobic than Western parts. I think it is a discussion that doesn't lead us anywhere. We have Pegida in Dresden, which is very strong and is growing again. But we've also seen same forms of opposition to Islam or Muslim immigration in Western cities, in Düsseldorf, Dortmund, where we were surprised that they, at least temporarily, took these forms. And there is, I guess, one moment that one needs to bear in mind. Other than in the eastern parts of Germany, in the Neue Länder, as I prefer to say, in the new Bundesländer, we have had more experience with Turkic migration in the Western, the old Länder, because we invited Turks to come as guest workers to Germany before unification. And so the Turkish element has had not been existent until 25 years ago. Or the Muslim element had not been in existence in eastern part at all, and so we have had a little more time to adjust to it, to get used to what that means. We have made big mistakes in integration because we have never had, and now we are only beginning to discuss an immigration policy on a national level. We have looked at these people as guest workers who would eventually go, but that hasn't happened. Unfortunately, despite us not being very forthcoming with integration offers, quite a few of the Turkish community have integrated extremely well. And now are great assets. So we point to these excellent examples, thinking that this hopefully will also happen with the new Muslim Arabic element, which is coming into the country. But we will have to make more efforts. And that means foremost to start with German language training right away, even in the refugee camps. And there are so many volunteers already these days who go there on a daily, hourly basis and sit down with refugees and teach them the basics of German. I think we will go along that way, and then whatever there may be of differences in maybe more tendency towards xenophobic escalation anywhere in the country, all that will be leveled out eventually. Yes, please.
I'd like to ask a question about, you were talking about Germany and what Germany's learning through this process, but of course we see other parts of Europe are also struggling with this issue, as you pointed out, in terms of Central and Eastern Europe, but certainly Northern Europe and Southern Europe and many other members of the EU. So my question is, if we look at 2 or 3 crises in Europe overall in the last few years, Ukraine, the Euro crisis, we see efforts to create new types of European institutions to try to help Germany, but help Europe in terms of. So my question for you is, with the refugee crisis, maybe you can speak as a private citizen or maybe as an official, where can you see, how can Europe become more integrated out of this crisis? How can this crisis be an opportunity for EU institutions in your opinion, either as a private citizen or as an official?
Yeah. I don't think it's a problem for me to do. It's a speculative answer that I can give at most. So I can give it as just as much as a official also. The EU Commission had early on recipes, including the contingents, and the EU Commission is, as it were, the government of the EU institutions. And the member states and their views come in through other forms, through the Council of Ministers, and there you have the frictions. So the civil servants who are working in the European Commission already represent a European approach to the question. And they are confronted with resistance from independent sovereign member states who face constituencies that are not happy with things that are happening. And as these constituencies are the ones who elect the governments, these constituencies there are differences. There are constituencies who think more as in a European way. Then there are citizens which think in a this country, that country way. And that is something where we can only come to a solution if and that may be a breaking point. Actually, there has been speculation whether this crisis is not more dangerous to the European Union as the euro crisis or the debt crisis of some member states. It is a breaking point for the EU as a whole, in the way that we need to have a European decision-making process that that embodies the European idea. Is that possible with backlash within certain countries? With the Front National in France, with more right-wing parties than Fidesz in Hungary, with right-wing parties in Denmark, and maybe in 2 years in Germany the AfD growing again, or other groups. I don't know. It's an open question, but it's a process that will show to what extent the European idea connected with more than economics and facilitation of border crossings stands for common norms and values. And these values can not be that of, that is at least the German position, of closing your eyes to global poverty, to unrest in regions where the European Union decided to turn the blind eye rather than getting involved at an earlier stage. Yes, please. Do we have time for two more questions?
I think we best moved on to discussion.
Okay, maybe we can integrate that, or you feel free to ask me afterwards. No, we have to go to the discussion, to the panel. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Consul General. If you all just be patient.